Welcome to the 359. I'm Ben Fox Rubin.
I'm Joni Salzman.
Spotify is rolling out its much anticipated IPO today, a big milestone for the world's biggest music streaming service. Okay, but we're not a business publication, so why is this important, Joan?
Well, it's important because, for any tech company, going public is like the milestone of adulthood. It shows that you've sort of come into your own, and it's a great position to look at Spotify's role in the world. Which is that it's not single-handedly, but been most instrumental in making the music business not be declining anymore. It's the last 2 years have been the best growth that it's had, basically since Bill Clinton.
For the music industry.
For the music industry, for the recording industry. But the downside of that is Spotify's basically just shoveling money to the music industry and not making any profit.
Right, they're currently unprofitable.
Very unprofitable.
They're very
like
very
Amazon level unprofitable.
Wow. Yeah, that existed for a long time. I think I remember from your story you said about 70 cents of every dollar.
More than that, yeah.
More than 70 cents of every dollar they bring in, they hand back to the music industry.
Just in royalties.
Just in royalties.
Yeah, just in licensing.
So is there a way for them to get to profitability?
Yeah, so there's two possible ways. One is that Spotify, already the biggest streaming music service by subscribers and by just plain listeners, becomes even bigger, so big that it can essentially force the music industry to lower how much they get paid.
Right, so it's a scale play.
It's a scale play, or some people that I talked to said there's also the opportunity for Spotify to broaden what it does outside of just music that comes with all those royalties. It's talking about going into, it already is in video and doing more of that, getting into spoken word stuff like podcasts.
And maybe like getting into like StubHub's business, perhaps?
It could get into live events. It could get in, one of the analysts I talked to said that we're going to look back at Spotify as a music listening service and laugh because like Amazon used to be a bookstore and now you don't, you go to it for.
That's true.
Like
so.
that Spotify could become an entertainment platform beyond just music.
We'll see if that happens.
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask you really quickly too. It's got a ton of competitors. So how is it doing against folks like Apple Music? Apple obviously makes a ton of money.
Right. Well, it's doing in terms of how people on the ground are using products. It has more subscribers than any of its competitors combined. Its next closest competitor is Apple Music, and they have about half as many subscribers. So in that sense, there's not really much competition just by those numbers. But the difference, of course, is that Spotify is all it is. Like Spotify is just Spotify. Apple has the iPhone. It has all these other things that make the money. Now, Apple's been saying that it wants its services like Apple Music to be a bigger part of its business. But really, like, it can just lose money on Apple Music as long as it wants.
Sure.
Who knows? Spotify could continue to lose money as much as it wants. Amazon did it for many, many years.
We'll see.
But we'll see.
Yeah. Next up, our own Dan Ackerman said it's time to break up with VR, writing, quote, virtual reality may yet become a massive mainstream hit, but it's not going to happen with this generation of tech. He was talking specifically about PC and console VR, not mobile, by the way. But you have a different take on this?
I just think that if you're saying, like, to say the very first version of a pretty new technology is that hasn't hit mass appeal yet, the idea that the masses need to break up with this thing that they're not already trying.
That it's still super new.
Yeah, it's still super new. And it's the first iteration, isn't what's going to get people to fall in love with almost anything.
I would agree, though, with Dan that there still are a lot of hurdles to VR these days. He specifies, moving around in VR while you're tethered is pretty difficult. There's also a lack of games, lack of content. Last, for our tech-enabled series, Abrar Al-Hidi wrote about new capabilities for prosthetic limbs like sense of touch. Definitely check out that story on CNET. If you want to read more about these stories, check them all out on CNET. I'm Ben Fox Rubin.
I'm Joni Salzman.
Thanks for listening.
Okay, thanks for joining us, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and jump back into the chat and see if I can pull out any good questions and comments to keep the conversation going. I think we kind of cheated that prosthetic story. I want you guys to expand some more on that because that was really fascinating.
Yeah, there's
never enough time in 4 minutes, so I just want to hear more.
There are a lot of, and I wish we had Abrar on to talk about this. But she goes into a lot of the new technologies that are coming into prosthetic limbs. One of them that I think is really interesting specifically is like thought control. So, and this is still fairly new, but the idea of actually being able to move around your prosthetic limbs with your brain waves, which is pretty incredible to think about, but it's still pretty early technology.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other one is sense of touch, of course, which definitely makes it easier to pick up a pen or smaller objects and just makes it more like, an actual limb as opposed to a prosthetic.
Right.
Yeah.
It's trippy stuff.
Let's talk about music, shall we? From Srinjoy, honestly solve this. What is Spotify? Don't tell me a streaming service. It's not that simple. Now, this is expanding on exactly what you talked about just a few minutes ago. How would you brand something like Spotify now? Because, like you said, Amazon was a bookstore. It's not a bookstore anymore. Mm-hmm. It's a store. It is the end-all, be-all incumbent of e-commerce, but is it a bookstore? No. What is Spotify now? Is it a music hub? Is it a music network? Or
I don't know what the right word for it is. And I think part of the reason why it's hard to come up like with the lightning bolt light bulb over your head perfect name for it is because the music industry, since the dawn of music, since like pianos got those like the piano rolls, like that's the very beginning of mass produced music. It's all been about buying and owning music. As long as music has been recorded or produced, it's all about buying and owning it, and you have it. And this is a dramatic change. It's a total change in the idea that you just kind of pay a fee and you have access to essentially almost all the music in the world. I don't know if there is a good word to say like what that is, but it's and Spotify is the one that not started it, but it's definitely the one that made it the norm.
It exemplifies it.
Yeah.
You two know a lot more about the music industry than I do, but I would probably say, correct me if I'm wrong here, that Napster was really the big disruptor, back in the 90s. And since then, the music industry has really been struggling to find its footing and find like a functional business model. And it seems that Spotify and streaming services have finally provided something of that.
Yeah. So the music industry's its difficulties began. Napster is what exemplified the problems in the late 90s, early 2000s. Peer-to-peer / piracy, the digitization of music and its ability to be swapped over the internet. The fact that it started out because the music industry, when I say that, I mean like the major labels, they were so intractable about because they had the CD, and the CD was just like a cash cow.
Well, you had sometimes like one good song, and then just crap,
and
all filler, no killer,
right?
And then you sold it for
$16 to $20 a pop
forever.
Yeah,
like I remember paying that when CDs first came out, and I remember paying that 5 years after CDs came out.
Please go ahead.
So digitization generally was the fact that the music industry couldn't see that that's how people were going to want to have their music. They wouldn't want to have this really poor value in a CD anymore.
Right.
The fact that they were so dead set on that, that really kind of set them on this path that's lasted them 20 years. It set them on this path where there was this, music consumers hated the labels because of them the labels sued people over digital things. And then when when iTunes happened, that stopped piracy, but it didn't help the music industry from still declining. I mean, you went from like $16 to $20 for an album to 99 cents for
the good song.
For the good song, or if you buy the whole album, that's still like if it's 12 tracks, that's only $12. Like even if you do buy the whole album and not just a single. So the last 2 years, in 2015 was the first time really that music sales stabilized for the music industry, and
it was a 20-year,
almost 20-year, And this past year is the first time that there's been accelerating growth in the music industry since like 1999, since Bill Clinton was in office.
There was another. Oh, go ahead.
No, please.
There was another point that I wanted to mention in the podcast, which was I've heard a lot of complaints from musicians about YouTube.
Right.
Why is YouTube getting crapped on, whereas Spotify is like the golden child? I don't actually understand.
So that's a really great question. The reason is because of this thing it's called the value gap. And the idea is that the fundamental difference between how people use YouTube and how people use Spotify is that Spotify offers a very popular subscription where people pay $99, $9.99, basically $10 a month. It's much easier for me to get out of my mouth. $10 a month. And that's Spotify's been very good about getting people to pay that much money. More successful than any other company. YouTube is predominantly used because people go to YouTube, type in what they want to hear, and they listen to it for free. And so it's an ad-based versus subscription model between the two. And the ad-based model, the YouTube model, pays really, really, really poorly. Mm-hmm. And so the music industry feels like that's where this idea of a value gap comes in. They're getting paid very, very little for a ton of listening. Whereas on Spotify, there's a ton of listening, but they're being paid much, 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 much more.
Right. And as far as they're concerned, a track is a track. Like you're listening to my song.
Right.
So, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's a commodity, unfortunately. Like we don't like to think about music. It's an art form, but it's also, because of digitization, it has become a commodity.
Mm. Yeah. It's become an essential part of a lot of people's day-to-day.
Yeah.
And naturally, there's a lot of people in the chat pointing out, like, there's a lot of great options to Spotify, you know? Like,
there are.
But no one's really presenting a fantastic monetary solution for the industry. And at the very least, Spotify's still kind of at the top of the list.
Yeah, Spotify, I mean, just in terms of subscribers, it's not to say it's the best streaming music subscription, but it's the one that most people are using around the world.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely marketed the best, I would say, at this point.
Yeah.
Is it a situation where the music industry at least realizes that it doesn't want to, kill the golden goose? Like,
no, the music industry loves Spotify now. Now that they're actually making money again, it's been really bleak in the music industry for a really long time. So they love Spotify at this point. But it's a when I say that, it's this like it's a frenemy situation because.
It's still a gatekeeper for them.
Yeah, like Best Buy and Walmart were the ones that were, sold the most music in the CD era, and now it's basically Spotify. And so they have this sort of frenemy situation where Spotify has pulled them out of the gutter, but as the bigger that one person gets, their goal is to have to pay the music industry less, because otherwise they're never going to make any money. And in addition to that, people talk about, is Spotify ever going to become a label itself, like Netflix, like take that Netflix model, like have original content. And in the Spotify sense, it would be original music that they own. I guess they own the masters for and all the rights for. But what's tricky about that is the labels are actually investors in Spotify. Like their own investors would be like, you can't take my business away from me, you know? So it's a complicated, everything with music industry is very complicated. And this is no exception.
There isn't a lot of brick walls, though, to stop Spotify from founding their own label.
I don't think so. I don't think there's anybody on there. I don't know, actually.
If they started sniping artists, they would be burning bridges they could never rebuild.
Yeah, that's the thing. They can't.
But if they start their own kind of up and coming,
right,
much like SoundCloud did. SoundCloud kind of embraced that entire concept of nobody knows you.
Right.
Let's lean into that.
And Spotify looked at possibly buying SoundCloud and decided against it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Yeah, they have to keep within the good graces of the labels for the time being, and that would mean not completely undermining the label's entire livelihood.
Yeah. One of the other elements that we should touch on is that Spotify's IPO is definitely different.
Weird. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're probably not going to make a ton of money.
They're making no money.
They're not making any money off of this IPO. So this whole talk about unprofitability and potentially getting more runway so they could keep the lights on, the IPO doesn't solve that.
Yeah, and it's not. And their argument is that it's not even an issue of having runway and being able to keep the lights on because they've gotten tons of funding. They're very well funded. But Daniel X says it's just weird. It's just very weird. Definitely nobody at this scale has ever done it's called a direct listing instead of an initial public offering. And the difference is basically like instead of having this whole dog and pony show where they line up particular institutional investors and having a bank that's there to make sure that
shepherd the whole thing
through, and also make sure that today when shares start trading that they can't plummet from like $20 to $2. That's what an underwriter does. They make sure that it stays like generally in the not horrible result zone.
Above the red.
Yeah. because they're not doing that, they're saving some money, a little bit of money, not as much as they could potentially make if they just had an IPO.
Or like a more traditional IPO.
A more traditional IPO.
Yeah.
And we also have no idea how many shares, because what it basically means is anyone who has shares in Spotify, workers, founders, investors, they can decide to start selling them or not. And so we have no idea how many shares are going to be available to trade.
This feels like a potluck.
We don't know
IPO.
what there is a bank that's helping shepherd this procedure through a little bit, and so they're going to land on an idea of how much the first trades are supposed to be, but we don't there's nobody that's going to be like, we say it's 20. There's somebody saying like, we think it should be $20 a share, but there's nobody being like, now that it's 3, maybe we should do something about that so people don't think that our company is dying.
Yeah.
I don't know. We have no idea. We really kind of have no idea.
They have a lot
exactly
of name
what's gonna happen.
recognition, so that's definitely going to benefit them, but you never really know with an IPO. I remember Facebook had some really miserable days starting off after they IPO'd a couple of years ago, and they had a ton of banks supporting them. So, yeah.
Now, I think you may have largely answered this in the past 30 to 60 seconds, but Imagine Sagi was saying, like, explain how they don't make money off the IPO.
So to crystallize that, to make it maybe a little more clear, usually with an initial public offering, a company says, all right, we've already given a bunch of shares to our founders and our employees and our investors. What we're going to do now is we're going to tell all those people, you can't trade those shares for like 6 months, but we are going to invent a pool of new shares. We're going to put that in the public market. And then 6 months later, all those people can start trading those shares too. That's another way that they keep, in an IPO, they keep the market for it from like going all over the place, is that there's a set pool of shares that can trade that have nothing to do with the shares that were already created for people before it went public. But in this instance, they're not creating those new shares. So it means that there's no new money being invented by having shares, period. It's all just, instead of the people that already have shares aren't subject to that lockup period, they can start trading them today as soon as it goes public. But what that means is Spotify doesn't make any money because it's not creating new shares. And it means that the number of shares that are in the market, they don't have that pile that was designated and set and is going to stay stable for 6 months. It's going to be just however many shares Daniel Ek decides he wants to trade, how many shares like the programmer that decides the algorithm for Discover Weekly decides he wants to start trading. So that's how it's a difference between normal and not making money.
They're not selling their own shares this time around, but when they do create a market for this, it means that they could potentially sell shares later down the road.
They could.
We'll see.
Yeah. Usually companies don't do that because other than an IPO, I mean, they do that, but they do it very strategically and carefully. Because what that means is you're basically diluting the value of a share if you create more of them.
Investors generally don't like it, but it does create a market for it.
Yeah.
Music industry is messy. So
that's Wall Street.
Let's talk a little bit of a history lesson here, because there's a really great comment here from Nick Poverman. We'll get to that in a second, but let's look back. So we talked about how Napster kind of like undid the threads.
Which actually, it's a fun fact. Napster is now a subscription-based service that is a competitor to Spotify.
Very true.
It's never died.
And Eagle Eye viewers will note that there were other peer-to-peer options prior to Napster, but they became the household name that kind of broke the system.
Yeah.
We moved on from there, and as we talked about earlier, Apple Music, iTunes, broke the album, the art of the album, by making it more song-based, single-based.
Right.
And then we bring up this headline that says Spotify saved the music industry, which is ambiguous at best. Let's expand on that for a second, because Nick says, I don't know everybody that uses Spotify, and as we mentioned, a lot of alternatives do exist out there.
Right.
Ryan is pointing out, like, I really am invested in the Google ecosystem.
Yeah.
How does that differ from Spotify? Like, I myself like Google Play Music. I can upload things that I own that don't exist, that aren't represented and streaming on a Spotify platform. But I would argue that the good thing that Spotify did for the industry is that they reopened the availability or the option or the art of the playlist of the album itself. And if we take a look back, I think I read an article a week or two ago about how 2017 was the best year for physical sales of music since 2011. And that's based largely around people wanting to collect again and people wanting to collect specifically vinyl.
Yeah, one of the interesting things that last month there was the latest data about 2017's sales in the recording industry, and at this point, physical music, CDs and vinyl, are a bigger business than iTunes. Like, more money is spent on that.
CDs too?
Yeah.
Wow.
Physical
People
sales.
still do buy CDs.
Yeah.
But it's
I mean,
like if you look at the chart,
porn.
it's
it's for lack of a nicer term, it's shelf porn.
Well,
People like
that's
to have stuff
probably-
on their shelves.
correct me if I'm wrong here too, but that's probably the stuff that's selling, right? Is the collectible stuff as opposed to like just one jewel case. It's
Yeah.
the stuff that looks really nice.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I do still like to buy vinyl, and I sound like such a aged hipster with that one, but it's like there's something about seeing that label in your
Lean into it.
line of sight
It
every
can look
single
really
day.
cool. I mean, like, records in particular
Are fun
really fun.
and pretty art.
There's art. I mean, it feels much less commoditized than a bunch of ones and zeros that you're streaming into your headphones.
Now, full disclosure, with every record I still buy these days, you get the download code, and
Right.
if I'm measuring
Right.
on per activation per volume, I'm listening to the stream a lot more because that's coming with me in my pocket. I'm
Yeah.
out more than I'm in.
Yeah.
And until they figure out a way to make a portable record player, noted,
Ooh.
then that's the way it's going to work for a lot of us
Yeah.
that are active commuters.
Yeah. Yeah.
I haven't listened to a record since the 70s.
Ben wasn't even alive in the 70s. He may seem old, but he's not that old.
I think my dad used to play records. It's cool that you guys are like big music people. For other people like me, I'm like, that's great.
I mean,
don't even
there
know
are
where I
people
would-
way more into music than
Oh, I'm
we
sure.
are.
Yeah.
I'm
Just-
sure. It's to me, I like hear what you guys say because I think you also collect records too, right?
I don't collect them, but I have records.
Yeah. And you have a record player?
Yes.
I mean, it's just
I
not
don't just have
something-
the records. I have the device with which to make them usable.
I think I do have. I
know-
do actually have 4 records in
I
my
know
house.
people
I
have
know.
records and no
No
player.
player.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm one of them. I have 4 records in my house, and they're in those Urban Outfitter cases. So yeah,
Oh,
I mean, like,
man.
I haven't put them up in my house yet.
That's
But
fun.
anyway, whatever.
He just
I'm
moved
not a music
year
guy.
ago.
Yeah,
It
That's
just
your excuse.
music should always be fun to an
Yeah.
extent, and I think Spotify kind of made it fun.
Well, you
Again-
brought up a great thing that we haven't talked about, which is playlists, which are the most powerful music discovery tool right now. It seems like, besides just straight searching for what you want, but that's not really discovery. That's knowing what you want to find and finding it. I feel like playlists they're super, super powerful for people finding music, and I think they have added a little bit more of the art to and the fun of music. It doesn't feel as antiseptic, when somebody's making something and they're like, I want to share it with you.
I will say this, that Spotify seems to, like, with its playlists, it seems to actually understand a little bit more about what type of music I actually want to listen
Yeah.
to. Whereas when I used to be more of a Pandora listener, I feel like they kind of got the genre right, sort of, but
Yeah.
not really.
Yeah.
So they seem to have, like, their algorithm seems to be pretty good as far as finding music that I'd be interested in listening to,
Yeah.
even if it's new.
That would be an interesting topic for us to deep dive into one day on a Slow News Day. I would love to learn more about how these algorithms work. And we've seen bits and
Okay.
pieces of them throughout, and a lot of them borrow from each other.
Yeah.
But that all this talks, ever since music has existed and personal recordings have existed, one of the best parts about music is the art of the mixtape.
Yeah. Oh my God, I miss mixtapes.
And that's why I think that's largely why Spotify has excelled so much, and why you can do similar things in Amazon Prime, Google Play Music, and other places. But Spotify really opened that door, and I guess my closing statement is I think Spotify is less of a streaming service and becoming largely more of a social network or a hub.
Yeah, there's definitely a social element to it. Music and social has had it's a path that's littered with the carcasses of people that have tried it, which is silly because music is such a community-based thing. But I do think that playlists are kind of the genesis of how music is becoming more social.
I mean, how many of us had their AOL Instant Messenger away message as song lyrics?
Oh my God.
It was a prereq.
Deep cuts in life. Deep cuts in life. But if you want, I could really quickly just go over some of the things that differentiate the algorithm of Pandora and Spotify.
I'd love to. I mean, I would love to learn more about all of them
All
and
right.
see how they all behave, because everyone's like, oh, this one's got a better one. This one's got. They all learn different things about
And
you
they
in
constantly
different
evolve,
ways.
yeah.
And how they play off each other and what they look to, because society is an ever-changing thing, and we're getting way too soapboxy on this one. But yeah, I would
Yeah.
always be interested to learn more about how they think, like, I'm going to really love this metal band when I've been listening to jazz for a straight week, which works for me.
I mean, that is weird. I couldn't even start to understand that. Usually when I listen to something on Spotify, they give me something close to it.
So basically, well, the thing that Brian, that you just mentioned, I can't remember. I think that Pandora and Spotify both do that. I assume they all do it. But one of the things that their algorithms can do is learn how elastic you are for surprise in the algorithm and what you're suggested. So somebody like Brian is somebody, I know Pandora does do this, and I assume Spotify does too. They not only do they learn what styles you like, they also learn how much diversity you like within the music that you're listening to. So if you're somebody maybe like Ben, who's like, I love my folk rock. You like folk rock?
Sure.
It's like one of you got banjo on your ringtone.
I'd go more bluegrass.
Okay,
but yeah.
I love bluegrass, and and apparently he doesn't want to go into folk rock, even though he likes bluegrass. And so, like Pandora and Spotify, not only did they learn that he likes bluegrass, but they also try to learn the fact that Ben likes to stay within a pretty small band of bluegrass, whereas Brian might be like, give me my death metal right after my bluegrass, please.
Right. So they figure out your listening patterns.
Yeah.
They figure out that you're chaotic.
Yeah.
Chaotic neutral.
Yeah,
Chaotic
PvG
gold.
chaos.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense, right? But that is kind of cool when you explain it that way.
Yeah.
So cool.
But yeah, so basically Pandora, what they do, they have this thing called the Music Genome Project. And they have music experts that listen to every single song and tag it for like between 12 and 30 different attributes. And that's the basis for which their algorithm understands that song. Spotify does it more based on this mass amount of usage and finding patterns within usage. And then Apple Music relies more on, it's more of a man-machine mix where they have more curators and they have more curated playlists to offer as discovery tools that are they definitely have personalized elements, but they're less personalized than Spotify is for sure.
Cool.
So just propose a question before I move on, and we are almost out of time, but we are having a couple requests to move on to VR, which we should talk about.
Oh, yeah,
VR
I
real
haven't
quick.
been able to drag Dan's story at all.
We'll take a few minutes for that. But in closing statements to end the topic of Spotify and music, who thinks that they might actually invest in Spotify? Who's going to buy Spotify stock when the time becomes available?
I mean, like,
when?
we're obviously
can't.
barred from doing it.
Yeah.
But
No. That's a call to the chat.
Yeah.
That's a call to the
call
chat.
to the chat.
Chat room. That would be real. That's the other. So the last thing that I didn't get to mention about this weird way that Spotify is doing an IPO is it means that normal human beings can invest. Like they didn't do like a roadshow where they went to all these institutional investors with piles of money and said, we want you to consider investing in us. Basically, if you have like an E-Trade account, you can start buying it as easily as somebody at Goldman Sachs could do it.
All right, so finishing off, who's going to buy stock? Where do we think Spotify is going to go next? Are they going to work into hardware? Are they going to integrate themselves into other places? Are they going to start to develop original content, buy a label, start a label, sign bands? Interested to see where anybody thinks any of this is worth going for them. And finally, are they going to overtake the mantle as the next great social network as Facebook sputters and dies?
It's a very interesting idea.
That would be crazy.
I personally
You can only communicate in song lyrics.
Oh my God.
Those are the only
It's very
statuses you
hard
can
to cyberbully
from your library.
somebody.
It'd be hard for there to be election meddling if we could only talk in song lyrics.
Oh, we'll see. I don't know. Those Russian trolls are pretty good.
Have you listened to Neil Young?
Yeah. But Neil Young, I don't know. Neil Young that's funny that you bring him up because he's so anti-streaming.
Yeah. So anyways, let's talk quickly about VR. We only have very general statements. People wondering if the PlayStation 5 could be a good place to revive VR, as a lot of people do agree.
Are there rumors about the PlayStation 5 already?
Well, there will be a PlayStation 5.
There will be a PlayStation 5, for sure.
But, Joan, go.
I don't know about PlayStation 5, but generally speaking, I feel like we're in the like pre-flip phone stage of VR right now. People talk about how VR has actually been a technology since like the 80s or even before the 70s. But I mean, really, this is the very beginning of consumer VR. And it's only been, 2.5 years? Has it been that long since normal human beings can try it? and see it.
Well, since this
And most
latest
people
incarnation of it where it's become
Yeah.
more household and more readily
I
available.
mean, at almost no point in history has there been the opportunity for normal human beings to buy and use VR like this. And it's also not going from like a telephone that you turn or punch and pick up and talk to. You know, like the smartphone had the flip phone as runway. It had traditional telephony as runway. I feel like this is like a new kind of interacting with media and people that we are totally unaccustomed to. And the technology is clunky and it doesn't work very well. But I also think that, like, I don't know, saying like it's so over when it hasn't even started yet. It seems premature. That's my take. But Dan's take, and I think that, and you're right, I think he does make some really great points that one of the reasons why it hasn't hit consumer adoption is because it is really clunky, it's really awkward, it's really expensive, and there aren't a lot of like motivators. There's not a Pokemon Go of VR yet. There's not something that's just a massive hit that makes everyone want to try it.
So were computers in general in the 60s, though.
Yeah.
And look where we've gone with that. You know, it's one thing to say it's sensationalized over. It's another to say, well, it is stale right now. And he's not wrong there. We haven't seen anything astonishingly new happen in a minute.
I also think that his art, I mean, and this is totally valid, but his article came to it from a gamer and hardware standpoint. I don't know. And I get to go see cinematic VR more than anybody, like a normal human being would, but I'm always surprised with how cinematic VR is improving and getting better.
So you're saying right now is maybe more of an opportunity for VR to embrace not the home entertainment, but the attraction entertainment, the theme park, amusement park type entertainment situation?
Maybe. Possibly. I think site-specific VR is really fun if it's done well. The only times that I ever see it being done well are at film festivals, and those are exclusive things, hard to get into and expensive too.
Yeah. You're saying it feels very exclusive still?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's definitely very exclusive. Yeah. And I think that Dan's totally right that mobile-based VR will likely be the thing that is separate from his issues with VR. Like I agree with him that I think that that's going to be how most people, if they do decide that they like VR, it'll be through a system like that.
I think it kind of goes without saying that mobile-based anything is the gateway for most things these days.
Right. Excellent point.
We are pretty much out of time. I like this comment, though, to kind of close things out from the 8th Cow, which expands into other ideas. If they want VR to become more mainstream, they need to do something for those who wear glasses. Wearing VR headsets hurts my eyes, and it's too blurry to read anything. Yeah. What are some things, y'all, in the chat?
I was going to say that, and I thought it was crazy. No, I totally agree with that comment.
No, yeah, absolutely.
It's super annoying to take. I wear my glasses in VR, and it's super annoying to take it on and off. I always think they're going to break.
It's also like, and I get annoyed with this because so many engineers are men. Like, it's really annoying when, like, I can't wear a headset if my hair's up like this. Like, I can't do it because it, like, won't fit if I have my hair back. If I have my hair in a ponytail, I have to take it out. Like, those are things that, like, predominantly male engineering forces I don't think about. And I'll cut them some slack. Like, that's not the primary problem they need to solve. But I do think these design issues, like, these are very simple design issues. Wearing glasses, having hair that isn't dude hair. Even like Brian's hair, like, it would ruin your hair to put on a headset, and you're very well coiffed.
Nothing ruins his hair.
Not a VR set, not nothing.
No, nothing. Yeah. So yeah, that's it for us. But I do want to hear more from people about where they think. Get really personal, really specific. What do you need out of VR to make it more worthwhile for you? Does it hurt your eyes with glasses? Does it affect your hair? Do you want it to just be implanted into your brain? Do you want it to be more affordable? Yeah. But yeah, let's sound off in the comments. And that was a great discussion today, everybody. We have a lot to go on, and hopefully we'll expand on these stories in the near future. Cool. Thanks, everyone. We'll say bye for now. Who wants to say take us out on the script?
You do it.
I'll do it. Yeah, the 359 podcast is available on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, FeedBurner, Google Play Music, the Amazon Echo, and of course, CNET.com. Thanks, everybody, for watching. We'll see you again tomorrow.
Take care.